back from our lunch break. And now we have...
Item 3 is from Public Works. It's a study session to identify options and direction for staffing and funding of disaster recovery programs with consideration of a disaster recovery response division. Receive, discuss, and recommend actions.
Okay. Jeff Krovitz, Public Works Department. These ideas have been discussed over the last year, at least the last year, since the Butte fire. And I was requested to respond to a presentation on how better to respond to disasters by Chair Edson. And tried to bring this forward a month and a half ago, and we were asked to postpone so we could meld the presentation with what was done by the Sheriff's Office this morning. So I guess that's appropriate.
I'm interested.
Yeah, good. A month and a half ago, I didn't expect that we were going to be faced with a majority of a new board, new people in your positions. So that's going to make this even more difficult than it's been to date. So let's get into this. I've provided a staff report to try to give a general picture of where the Public Works Department is at. In the last month and a half, I've received more information due to continuing progress with some of the programs, meetings that I've had with Cal OES and FEMA with Chair Edson, where more information was provided to us. And so I'll try to kind of correct a couple of things in the board packet as we move into the study session. So purpose of the study session, discuss potential strategies for implementing disaster recovery programs. I don't think I have to remind you of what these disasters are, but I will for those people who are tuning in on television. We have the Butte Fire, which has a number of programs for recovery. The Butte Fire burned land mass approximately 10% of the county, approximately 8 or 9% of the county-maintained road network, destroyed somewhere between 550 and 600 homes, over 1,200 structures, not to mention the damage that was done to other entities beyond the social services, the effect to water systems, fencing systems, and of course it opened up a whole lot of daylight hitting the ground, which encouraged a mass change of ownership in land and land use within not only the county but the burn area, and that's had significant effects on staff. We also are faced with that second disaster, the tree mortality, the county-wide disaster, that basically occurs above about 2,000 to 2,500 feet and goes up well above about 6,500 feet. Above that, it's not as noticeable. And we have, of course, less private lands and county-maintained roads. And I listed a few hazard mitigation grant programs, both current programs that we have accepted grants for, and then future funding opportunities for hazard mitigation. Do want to clarify for the board right now is that these grants are independent of the disaster. Having a disaster declared gives a county or an entity like us or CCWD that's affected by a disaster a leg up, a higher priority for funding, but the purpose of hazard mitigation is to mitigate hazards from potential future occurrences, high likelihood future occurrences. And that's why it's been so important that we not only adopt an EOP that you did this morning, but we also have a local hazard mitigation program that would identify the types of disasters that the county that may be expected to occur within the county in the future. And those disasters identified in the local hazard mitigation program are those that would be eligible for future grants under a hazard mitigation program. So, I'm the first to admit that Public Works has had extreme difficulty meeting the current core mission, and I could probably put a period right there and stop, but I'm going to continue, and meeting the requirements of disaster recovery with the existing staff that we have. I think it was a fairly telling slide that you saw this morning presented by the Sheriff's Office when you talked about the number of full-time staff that were staffing Office of Emergency Services starting in the early 2000s to what they are today. You went from 6 or 8 full-time staff to 2 part-time staff now, or that was the staffing level of on the day the fire started. So response, of course, is going to be difficult. Recovery is going to be difficult if you haven't planned for it. So that brings up the question, well, when does recovery start from a disaster? And I've learned this over the last 20 months, actually less, 15 months, because that's how long since the fire. 20 months is my tenure. Recovery has to start before the disaster. If you do not have people in place that understand the structure of disaster, the nature of recovery, the organizations that we are working with, the number of organizations that we must communicate with, the requirements that we must comply with, environmental, funding, matches, then it's as if you were assigned a job in another country where you don't speak the language. You may know your job very well, but you don't speak the language. You've got to learn the language to be able to do your job. And there is a whole language associated with disaster recovery. So we missed that opportunity. We were not ready to recover from these disasters before they occurred. And is that a failing of any given department? No, it's probably a failure of the county as a whole. And it's more a reflection of funding and staffing than anything else. At least that's my read, being not the newest kid on the block, because I'm now, I guess, turning into a tenured department head. Moving on, how is recovery managed? And I think that's a really important question. How do you manage a recovery? Well, you need to have people that know how to recover. They need to have the time to work on the program, and the expectation that existing staff with existing duties are going to be able to perform a recovery program of any size and any magnitude is, I think, an unrealistic expectation. I don't believe that it occurs, and I think that probably everybody here, at least county employees, understand that. One staff member is sick, or one staff member resigns, retires, moves on, and until we can fill that position again, that work does not get done. So, anyway, the last question I really ask, and I don't have answers for all these questions, but I think they're important, is how do you fund recovery? Every single recovery program or grant comes with strings attached. And the strings that comes attached are usually a local match, as well as compliance with the rules of the road, the regulations, the environmental restrictions, and compliance that we have to do when we accept these funds. So that is also part of any recovery. If you don't know where the money is coming from, how do you know what you can do and where are you going to move from? So I've talked a little bit about the disasters. I talked about the first disaster in your board packet, the Butte Fire. I don't think I have to beat that one up. We all have lived it for the last year. And we've had a lot of discussion about the second disaster, the tree mortality. Now, thank goodness that this hasn't fallen entirely on Public Works. Admin has taken on some of the duties to move this program along. The unfortunate thing is that we're in a second tier of funding. It's a 25% local match for the removal of these trees. And these trees are continuing to die, and they're going to die at an increasing rate. And the only thing that's going to stop it is a change of weather. And it's going to be a massive change of weather. But irregardless, if we get, 4 winters in a row of greater than average precipitation, the trees that have been in the process of dying for the last 5 years of these climate change will continue to die over the next 4 or 5 years. So this program is here for a while, and it could be here for a long time. Interesting news that I heard, I reviewed a Forest Service report from a fire in Washoe County that occurred this fall, and that's in Nevada on 395 between Carson City and Nevada and Reno. And it happened on the east face slope of the Sierras, which are east of Tahoe, and it burned several thousand acres, and the cause of the fire was, of course, a Forest Service controlled burn. But what was interesting to me when I was reviewing some of the reports on it is they said that it is unlikely in our lifetimes or the next several hundred years that that forest will ever recover. But they don't have the precipitation to bring it back. So that means that those hillsides are going to be barren, rocky hillsides that may be covered with brush, but they're not going to be covered with trees again. So we've got to accept the fact that we have climate change that will affect our environment in a way that's at least permanent for our own lifetimes. We've got to be able to adapt to that. So the third disaster that I didn't intend or none of us could foresee was what I call tree mortality within the burn. And I'll get to this. This is all in the staff report. Is that we had a bounce back effect within the burn area. The trees that burned and died gave off pheromones. They attracted more bugs that were busily feeding, moving from south to north, migrated into the burn area, and then the trees that survived the burn now are being attacked because the beetles aren't attacking the burned trees, they're attacking the adjacent live trees. So we have a higher mortality rate within the burn area than we anticipated, and that will also continue. It's really the second disaster, part B. Then, of course, the third or the fourth disaster, however you want to count these things, is what I call the lack of county resources. Going into disasters of this magnitude as far behind as we were. I know within my department and the divisions of the programs that I have under my jurisdiction, we were very behind. And first thing, of course, is to try to fill staffing positions so you have a chance to catch up, and then take the big items on, get yourself operating legally if possible, trying to get your house in order. And to that, we're going to pile on a few more disasters. Not asking for pity, I took it on. But the bottom line here, and this is the most important thing for today, is that limited county resources to meet disaster recovery demands result in impacts to current county programs and missions, and it delays recovery execution. So I can say that again, it's important, but the bottom line is that current workloads, added workloads due to disaster recovery affect not only what you're currently doing, but your ability to recover. And the recovery programs have a timeline. And their timeline start from the date of the disaster declaration. And your first timeline ends in 60 days. You have a 60-day window with which to start many recovery programs. If you don't meet that 60-day window of starting those recovery programs, you now have been moved out of an emergency response area where you have some programmatic relief from compliance with environmental rules and regulations. So how does one, with purchasing policies and emergency operations and lack of knowledge of funding and things like that, how do we execute contracts with, say, an arborist or a tree removal contract within the first 60 days following a fire to start removing burned trees so that we can kind of foreshorten some of the environmental overhead that one has to do to meet compliance with both NEPA, because you're accepting federal funds, and CEQA, because you're accepting state funds. So that's a near impossibility within that time frame, unless, of course, we had on-call contracts or people in place prior to, and that also seems a little bit silly. One can't do that. So the process is not exactly set up for neophytes, probably the best way to say it. I'd like to give you a couple more examples of effects on current staff for a disaster like the Butte Fire. I'll start with the Road and Bridges Division. Our guys were out immediately. We were called out. We were closing roads. We were providing detour signage. We were assisting the sheriff's office with closures. And in the first 2 weeks, we were cutting down trees that were still burning alongside of county roads so that they wouldn't burn through and fall across the roads, and CAL FIRE still maintained access for their response. So we were out in force. We weren't at the front lines of the fire, but we were providing access for response. Okay? That lasted for about 25 days or so, and then we moved into emergency repairs. And emergency repairs included a wide variety of things. We went out into some private property and protected structures that were likely to flood or be damaged in the aftermath. And we did that through grant programs that were made available to us through NRCS. We did emergency repairs on roads. We did emergency work on drainage facilities because we knew we would take on more rain, we knew we would take on more runoff, we knew we would take on more sediment, and felt that our job is to keep the roads as open as possible. That continued. Actually, it still continues today. But what it meant is that I divided our road staff. 75% of them were essentially focused on the burn area. 25% of them were focused on the remaining part of the county. And so they were responding to work requests, and that was about all that they did for the first 60 to 90 days following the fire. The ones that were out in the field and were doing the emergency repairs or the emergency response were not preparing for winter up in the high country, and you all heard about that, especially Supervisor Oliveira. We did not prepare to the extent that was required because we didn't have the staff to do it. So anything that we do, we're either going to borrow from Peter to pay Paul or vice versa. So it's kind of a conundrum. Another example that I think is really important here is the impact that the fire had on the management, public works management, and our engineering staff. In the first 3 months after the fire, I tried to keep my management staff as focused on our existing core mission programs as possible, and I focused as much on the fire. I figured that made as much sense as anything since they'd been they're long-term employees, they knew what the programs were, they knew where they were going, and I didn't know as much about it. And the fire was going to be new to all of us, so I felt like I was the most expendable management staff to be able to focus on the fire. That was a fairly killing time, a lot of hours put in, and the first, as I say, 3 to 4 months was either in a support role, supporting other departments, Environmental Health Agency, Auditor's Office, FEMA, Cal OES wanting to tour, helping mission-tasked employees that were coming from Stanislaus or Los Angeles get out into the field without getting lost or shot. So we spent a lot of time doing that with extra hire staff under my direction. In the meantime, my engineering staff was continuing to work on our core programs for integrated waste management, but let's just talk about our CIP, our capital improvement program. And let's only talk about those projects in the capital improvement program that have a value, construction value, of more than $100,000. Okay? I have approximately 20 of those projects in our current to-do list. These are funded with a combination of local funds, state funds, and federal funds. So once again, they're very similar to what we have to do to comply as we do with a recovery program that's a local declaration and a federal declaration. These projects have funding timelines, and the timelines might seem very long, but when you look at how long it takes to execute a public works project, a 10-year timeline to program a project, do your preliminary engineering, and get your environmental approval, they give us 10 years. In some cases, that may not be enough. You can get a 2-year extension, but if you don't meet the milestones for the given process that you're in with these capital projects, with external funding coming in, then the county becomes liable to repay the monies that have been expended to date. Okay? I did a quick look at our 20 projects or 19 projects. A lot of them are bridges, but not all of them. Some of them are Mountain Ranch Road, the sidewalks project out here, the O'Byrne's Ferry Road left-hand turn project. You've all heard about these. The bridge preventative maintenance program. To date, we've expended about almost $4.6 million on those projects to get them moving towards completion. And you've heard all along about where they are at with completion. You know that Railroad Flat is ready to construct, and we should have another bridge or two next year. But with that type of expenditure and that type of risk, if we miss those dates, we're paying the money back, and we don't have the money to pay it back. We have to execute it. So now we've got recovery here, capital programs here. Where do we live? We live in the middle. So let's talk a little bit about the current Butte Fire recovery programs that Public Works is currently working on. You all already know about the disaster removal program that was done by Cal Recycle through Environmental Health Agency. But the ones that are under our management would be a couple of public assistance programs, one for debris removal trees. Our current estimate is between 15 and 16 million for that program alone. Okay? The match on that, and this is one of the items that I found that is a change from when I first prepared the staff report, is that I listed it as a 0% match. It's actually a 6.25% match. Without legislation from the state, that match isn't waived. I've been told by several people, including people at OES and people within the county, that that match is waived. It's not. That's $1 million in match.
So how did you discover that?
Oh, I had a meeting with Cal OES and I asked them point blank.
And before they were saying it was?
I've just heard different conflicting information. And I've never heard the direct answer to the question until we actually sat down, I think it was about 3.5 weeks ago. Wasn't it, Supervisor Edson? And the local match, even though I have listed them as fixed amounts within the staff report, it really depends on when they occur. The quicker one can do recovery, the lower the match. The longer it takes you to do the recovery, the higher the match to a limit. Okay? And that limit is the most you would potentially pay if you could complete the recovery program within the time frame that you've been allotted, okay, for the given program. So we've got the debris removal trees. We are right now on the cusp of taking out trees. In the last couple of weeks, we've done a number of things. We've declared a disaster, and things are happening with the tree program. I'll talk about that in just a minute. I just want to continue on. The road repairs for about 40 miles worth of road, estimated construction cost, roughly $8 million. The match, 6.25. That's $500,000. The emergency recovery for road repairs, the other half of our roads, a different program managed by Caltrans and Federal Highway, a roughly $11 million program. That's an 11.5% match. That's $1.3 million. We have a couple of grants that we've taken on, these hazard mitigation grants. They total up to about $4.5 million. That's a 25% match. So that's about a $1.1 million. So what I'm looking at here is I'm looking at a total estimated value for Butte Fire Recovery programs within Public Works of about $40 million with a match of about $4 million. Okay? The $4 million and all of these programs, or most of these, the bulk of these programs center around county-maintained roads. Okay? My annual road fund is roughly $5 million. Okay? For everything that we do, and that includes snow removal. So I started looking into, well, how many people do I need to do work? And I think let's move on in. So I'll get into these more in detail. This now deviates from the staff report and moves on. To me, our current highest priority, and this is for Public Works in the county, is the removal of hazardous trees. The hazardous trees are those burned trees that are adjacent to county-maintained roadways that are in danger of falling. They've been standing dead for more than a year and 2 months. They are rotting. Every day they are rotting. They're not continuing to grow. And some of them have started falling. We've heard a number of stories about them. Public Works has taken out 4 or 5 in the last month and a half. We asked our arborist to do a drive-by through the county roads. He identified an additional 12 trees that he feels are in need of coming out immediately. That means that these are trees that have a high potential of falling onto the roadway in high wind or in high rain with saturated soils. Okay? So what are we doing about that? I couldn't get a schedule back from FEMA or Cal OES in terms of when we would get permission to begin removing trees. So we have prepared an RFP for on-call contract to remove these trees, because many of these trees are beyond the skill set of my road crews. And the other question is, do we want to dedicate road crews for a number of weeks to removing trees to the detriment of getting ready for winter storms, repairing roads, repairing collapsed culverts that we've been doing for the last 2 years? So we're moving ahead with that. I am very optimistic that we will be having permission in the next 2 to 3 weeks to begin removing trees. We got official clearance this morning from the United States Fish and Wildlife Service that they've accepted the mitigation program for the endangered species mitigation, both plant and animal, and also for the protection of surface waters. We have seen the suggested program that has gone to SHPO from the federal government, suggesting on how we can comply and mitigate archaeological resources, historical and cultural, Native American and historical. So I'm hoping they have a 15-day window to respond. They've had that for 5 days. We have a few problems with the program, but we think we can work through them, and we don't want to slow it down. But in the meantime, we have to continue. We have to be ready and poised to be able to begin removing trees as quickly as we can. To that effect, you know that we've marked, for the most part, 100% of the public trees on the public rights-of-way, about 60% of the private property trees to the limit of the rights of entries that we've received that allow us to go onto the property. We have the contract in place for the arborist and the hazardous tree removal contractor. NEPA approval is pending. CEQA approval we have done. Board declared a local state of emergency in November of 2016 to assist the feds with their NEPA approval and to give Public Works the ability to go out to these on-call contracts and get trees removed if I can't get approval in the very, very near future. And today and tomorrow, FEMA and Cal OES are back out on the roads again, sampling and verifying that the trees that we marked are indeed dead and they've been marked properly. Their reaction from today's voyage was that, hey, every single tree that you marked was absolutely correct to 100% level, and there are more trees that are dead out there that should have been marked. So, but since there have been difficulties in getting our approval of our program because the number of trees constantly change due to the various disasters that we have, we will fight that one after we start removal. Okay? So, in terms of the roads, public roadways, that's the FEMA PA, public assistance roads. Roadways have been assessed. Some allowance by FEMA for post-fire recovery traffic damage has been allowed. That's why that program has gone from about a $500,000 program to a $7 to $8 million program. Okay? The public roads, federal highway roads, those are the roads mostly that have yellow lines down the middle of them. Assessment has been completed by the county and Caltrans. Damage assessment forms are in progress. The damage assessment forms, or the DAF forms, are required to move the program forward. They have to go to Caltrans. Caltrans reviews those for cost and scope, and then they approve us to move ahead, getting designers and contractors to actually do the work. That's assuming I knew where the match was coming from. The DAF forms slowed down because the extra hire that I had targeted to work on that program got sucked up 100% of his time, actually more than 100% of his time, in the hazard tree removal program. Road repair construction, we are hoping to do the completion of hazardous tree removal program. If I have two contractors out there doing two separate pieces of work, which is the way it would do if I tried to do these simultaneously, and one contractor claimed delay because the other contractor closed a road or was in the middle of a paving operation or was dropping trees across the road, then those delay claims would be paid for by the county, and they would not be reimbursed by any of these programs to any effect. So that's a risk I don't feel that I can take on behalf of the county, to put more than one contractor or more than one group of contractors doing different type of work simultaneously out in the field. To be able to do these programs, we need a program manager and we need a staff. So the grant programs that you've heard so much about, the FMAG and the HMGP, those are mitigation. The way those grants were written was to prevent erosion, to highlight the highest areas elevation-wise within the burn area, give them some erosion and sediment control treatments to prevent them from landsliding and then consequently cascading more damaged soils below them into our creeks, streams, and rivers. This needs a program manager and staff. The program manager and staff for this can be partially funded through the grants, but there's still match to be made. Okay? Moving on. County resources. So the total county has about 500 employees, plus or minus, about $158 million total budget, or about one employee for every $316,000 we're spending. 16-17 Public Works budget, 80 employees, $25.4 million, that's a total program, or one employee for about $320,000. That's about the same. Close enough, I think. Butte Fire Recovery, I estimate 6 employees for 2 years to manage a $35 to $40 million program. That would be a minimum, and that would be assuming that we contract out design, we contract out construction. That's just to manage those resources. So, tree mortality, unknown cost, unknown duration. For today, I'm going to estimate 4 to 8 years. In my board package, I estimated 5 to 10. Doesn't really matter. We currently have one part-time staff on 960 hours working on grants, even though this isn't funded. How much is this program worth? I don't know. Can I guess? More than the burn tree program, which is at $16 million, because there's more tree mortality along county roads within the county than there are burn trees along county roads in the Butte Fire area. So what that means is if you take a timeline, and I've got a graphic in the board report that talks about the match requirements over time, and you're overlapping Butte Fire recovery, tree mortality recovery, not even talking about anything else, is that you're looking at a total bell curve expenditure of what can be, what I'm estimating today, about $8 million. I estimated about half of that just for Butte Fire recovery. Okay? And so this is more money that we may or may not have, but we have to make some hard decisions. Okay, so I suggested that any effective response has to have a structure, and the structure needs to be staffed with people that know the programs going in, even if they don't know the details of the county, or people that are current county employees that can conceivably be redirected without damage to existing programs, that know these programs. So I suggested a director at about a 75%, not necessarily full-time, an administrative analyst, full-time for 2 years, part-time for 1 year. We've estimated an annual staffing cost associated with these things, a deputy director to help direct the work of the individual programs. Again, part-time, be a half-time position for 2 years while these disaster recovery, and this is only Butte Fire, this is not tree mortality, moves on. Then move down to the larger structure and look at the organization in terms of the programs that you're doing. So you've got the roads program that I've already talked about and what the costs are for those, staffing cost. I showed tree removal programs. One of them is the fire trees, and one of them is tree mortality trees that I don't know about. I talked about mitigation grants, and I also included a few other grants that I know Mr. Miller is pursuing as part of the tree mortality program. And if you look at the bottom of the slide, and this slide has been reproduced from your staff report, you can see that the total cost under the roads program, 18 to 25 million, total cost for tree removal, 13 plus an unknown amount for tree mortality, and you look at the hazard mitigation grant program, 4.5 million. Lots of money. So, total salary, total county staffing cost, we approximated about $500,000 per year. Okay? That's recovery. That's on top of Office of Emergency Services that you guys were considering this morning. Total estimated match of about $850,000 a year, and that's going to be for 2 to 3 more years. And again, I reiterate, does not include tree mortality. County staffing, 6 positions. Extra hire may not be the correct title. Extra hire is meant to be a 6-month duration. It's not meant to be part-time, year-round. It's meant to be for a short-term relief. We use extra hire snowplow drivers, and we have about 25 to 30 of them, so that when it snows, we're not taking our roads and bridges staff off of their daily duties, yet we're still getting the snow removed. So these would probably be better stated as limited-term positions. And we know that when filling positions in the county, if we don't have an existing project job description, it takes longer because job descriptions have to be approved by Board of Supervisors, and that takes time. And so we identified the closest that we could within the Department of Public Works, staffing positions that could handle the type of work that we envision on these recovery programs. So we've got a director, a deputy director, engineering, administrative analyst, 3 senior engineers, some of them full-time, some of them part-time. And then contract staffing, looking for a project manager only for the road portion, ER and PA, and that was about $143,000 a year. So, again, this is a study session, this is a concept. I will tell you that my department will continue to the limit of our staffing and the limit of our resources to do tree removal. I don't have an idea of where my match is going to come from, but I hope it makes itself clear to me. If the match has to come, I might be coming back to a different board next year and saying I'm having to shut something down.
Come back
Okay.
to Mike.
Yeah, that'd be the guy right there.
So, and this disaster recovery, you know, the argument about whether it would be within OES, whether OES would be at admin or in the sheriff's office, or whether disaster recovery for these types of programs would sit in Public Works, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't. That's less important than the work that actually needs to be done. Are these 2 mitigation grant programs necessarily in the purview of Public Works? No, they occur on private land. Our mission is the roads that we maintain and the solid waste programs that we affect, the transit buses that we run. They're all part of a disaster recovery or an emergency response program. So it doesn't matter where they sit or who staffs them, but we've got to have them staffed and we've got to have the funding identified, the match identified. Are there alternatives? Yeah, there's always an alternative, and I discussed this in the staff package, that you could go with 100% consultant services. However, you would still need a minimum of 5 or 6 full-time people, limited term, but full-time people within the recovery program to meet your state and federal requirements for oversight, for management, for admin, both direct and indirect costs, just because of the size of these programs. Okay? Other alternative, I hate to throw this out, but you can reduce the core mission of the department who has the responsibility, decide what you're going to give up and what you're not going to do. I often refer to this as leaving a baby lying alongside the road. It's a horrible image. It's not one I like to live with. But reduce the core mission and prioritize fire recovery or disaster recovery programs. Third alternative, I don't know. I do know that I am committed to continue these programs to the level of staffing I have available, to the level of funding I have available, and I am not going fast enough. It's about what I have.
Okay. Questions?
So, thank you for putting this together. I know it's kind of a, the transition period between boards, so it's kind of difficult, but I do appreciate the information still, and the time, putting it together. Obviously, you've been thinking about this for a while, and just curious, in your study, did you come across another county or other jurisdictions that have done something similar?
What larger jurisdictions do is they take staff that are working on those programs that are essentially nice to have, not necessarily need to have, and they redirect their employees, and they put them into these positions and move ahead, and then hire consultants as much as they can. fundamental difference, I mean, the closest comparison we could have is Lake County. Lake County burned about 60,000 acres, about 50, a little more than 50 miles of road. They lost 1,000 homes. Their 1,000 homes were essentially two major communities. They didn't lose as many trees, they didn't have as much road, but they have a population of over 300,000 people instead of 45,000 people. So they necessarily have a larger staff. For the tree program, they had been through this before during the Jerusalem fire and delayed in similar fashion to what we did, and kind of got burned by it, and so they were committed in the Lake County fire not to have that happen. They went out with immediate contracts that did not necessarily meet federal requirements because it was more important for them to get the trees out of the way, and they were willing to risk the not being reimbursed for that amount of funding. We don't have that luxury in terms of funding. We have less resources. We have less tax increment paying for those resources, and they have been on a fairly steady decline for the last 10 years. We all know this. I'm not giving you guys new information. And in terms of the other programs, they had at least been through a smaller fire. Lake had been through a smaller fire. They'd experienced it once before, so they went into the Lake fire with experienced staff. And their experienced staff just continued in the next fire. So they had another one this fall. It was smaller, and it wasn't a declared disaster, but they just continued on. So for them, it's almost as if they have a full-time group that not only helps with response, disaster response, but also is permanently full-time employed in recovery. And I'm assuming once they get past the initial 3-year period of the recovery, then they will move those people back to their home positions, as it were.
And this division, is that how you're envisioning it as well? As a temporary, until the tree mortality issue is finished in 2000?
My thinking about it is you would start it, you would ramp it up. They would be working on Butte fire recovery because we know we have programs that will fund that, assuming we can identify and fund the matches. And then as money becomes available in the next year or 2 years for tree mortality, then they would roll into that in terms of a funding program. Mr. Moss may be able to speak to that. He might have a different plan.
Well, what I can tell you is that obviously the administrative office excuse me, is currently leading the tree mortality program, as well as 2 of our board members who sit on the statewide task force. There is CDA funding available, which is at 25% county cost, but there's also, if you have a LHMP, local hazard mitigation plan, adopted into the general plan, then that legislatively might be reduced, that 25%. Probably not to 0, but it can be reduced. Similar like if we had a federal declaration, possibly to 6.25%. So that is going to require legislation. This was a bill that was passed. The initial bill was passed, I think, in 2006 or 2007 that allows for this. So we are working on that. Also, it's important to note that tree mortality is an ongoing gubernatorial declaration. And that means, as an example, we applied for and received approval for $1.7 million. That's just the opening salvo. Because it's an open declaration, unlike the Butte fire, we will continue to go back as we continue to ramp up on the program. So I think that's important to note as well. Also, I've been in touch with our planning director, Peter Maurer, and he did state that it's possible to have the LHMP adopted into the general plan and brought before the board in February of this coming year, so a couple months from now. So I appreciate your work on showing your grasp for the tree mortality, the costs associated with that. It indeed is a long-term disaster. And so with that recognized, we know that we have a lot of work to do. Mr. Miller has been working diligently on several options. for tree mortality, including, but not limited to, even doing RFPs for eventual registered foresters to get out and deal with the tree mortality specifically. So with that said, just wanted to bring everybody up to date. So thank you for that opportunity.
Can you give me some updates on the FMAG and HMGP?
Had a series of telephone calls with FEMA and Cal OES, our representatives, in late October and early November. The FEMA environmental branch that does NEPA clearance for these programs asked for additional mapping and additional information. We provided that to them on the time frame, and they said thank you. We asked them for a schedule, and they said no thank you. But I'm assuming that if it follows the same pattern that the burn tree program went through, it will take them 2 to 3 more months to be able to complete the environmental clearance that would allow us to deploy contractors. So what that program would need specifically would be an RFP to hire a project manager. The project manager could then assist us with the preparation of construction contracts for 1 or 2 or 3 contractors. I would think it would be 1 or 2 or 3 contractors for both aerial lead deployed erosion and sediment control and land deployed erosion and sediment control, because that's what the grant specified. And then get the right of entries from those targeted high priority parcels and begin the deployment of the program. Again, for every dollar of money expended, 25 cents must be identified. Now, the FMAG program has already made its match just in the preparation of the grant and the donated hours for the exhibits and the targeting of parcels within the program. We have some monies that we have already essentially stored or earned, as it were, in the preparation of the HMGP, but nowhere near $1 million. So you could call it $1 million, you could call it whatever you want. It's 25 cents on a dollar. Right. And there are limitations. I cannot use materials, the ground trees that came out of that would come out of the burn tree removal program as mulch, because they've been paid for by one federal program and then applying to another federal program. I can't use them for that. Okay? And the same thing would probably be true if we were actively doing tree mortality removal and grinding of that material. So, but that doesn't mean that we can't use material that are produced on a regular basis out at the landfill and at Red Hill and at Wilseyville with green waste programs. So.
A real quick comment on the HMGP, different than the FMAG, is that, as explained to the board several months ago, this is kind of one of those spend-as-you-go line of credit programs, if you will. So you don't have to spend the full $3 million with $1 million match. What you do is you identify your assets and what you can spend for your deductible, and then you go ahead and spend the grant monies behind it. You have 3 years to do that program.
So it's safe to say they're still moving forward, and it's just a matter of, just working out the paperwork, but it's happening. It's just it's moving slower than we'd all like, as usual, dealing with these types of situations.
Well, we're all learning as we go along, and it's not just staff members here at the county. It also includes Cal OES and FEMA. They have never done a burn tree removal program to the level that they've done for NEPA clearance on this one. And state laws, CEQA laws, that have brought forward a requirement for a consultation with local Native American tribes, whether they are nationally recognized or not nationally recognized, that's new to them, completely new to them. And it took them longer to figure it out. But as I say, we've gotten through it, and hopefully the next time it's easier.
And then as far as the RFP goes for the program manager, are you waiting until final clearance on the go-ahead on these programs? Or are you going to do that now? Or
once again, the big issue for me in Public Works is that the only money that I don't believe that I have any monies in Public Works that will allow me to make that match, because the mission of Public Works, it's either an enterprise fund, or it's federal funding for transit, or it's a combination of state and federal funds for roads. None of these falls within the purview of doing erosion and sediment control as hazard mitigation on private land.
Right.
So, once again, in spite of what Mr. Moss said, that it's a pay-as-you-go and it's a line of credit, we're still, if I hire a project manager, and let's just say that it's going to be a $180,000 contract for 2 years. When I bill the federal government $180,000 for that contract, they would return to me 75% of that money.
Right.
The other 25% has to come from somewhere.
Yeah. So, and I understand that you don't have that money in the budget.
It's not even a budget, it's an omission. I don't have
Right.
those types of funds that are at the discretion of my department to spend on that program.
So,
So it has to come from another location.
but if you come back to the board and explain it, and it looks like we need that in order to do this work, right? So,
Right.
I don't know what the next board will do, but I know I would certainly, as a D2 supervisor, I can't say what Karamindy will do, but I mean, this is a critical point, and it's not a vast sum of money, so I would hope that you'd be able to bring it forward to the next board and explain the situation and hopefully at least get funding for that small component of the overall program.
We've actually been trying to get it since March or April. And
Well, was that a part of the agenda item that was brought forward to us?
we've talked about it several times.
We've talked about it, and I tried to put our matches into our annual budget, but I was asked to pull it out to try to deal with recovery budgets independently. And so we haven't really dealt with recovery budget anywhere else. At least I haven't been involved.
Well,
So,
I mean, that would be my advice, is
Okay.
to bring that forward to the board, work with, if you can't, obviously, this is wrapping up now. I understand things are in transition, but, if you have the ability to work with the incoming D2 supervisor on this, I think the rest of the board would at least, consider doing something like this. And I think it's such a critical component. If it's going to hang up the HMGP or the FMAG program from going forward, it seems critical that we fund it. I mean, I would love to see this come up to our next board meeting, but I don't know if that's possible, so.
yeah,
They're not going to do it for us. So
and again, to me, I've got several RFPs or several public bids that have to come in front of the board. I have an on-call contract for emergency tree removal. I've got an RFP for a program manager to manage the rest of the burn tree removal program going in front of the board. Then I've got a program manager for the roads recovery, PA and ER. And after that, I feel like I then am free to go after the FMAG HMGP, because those are the order of priorities.
Why can't we do all those in one board meeting? We just have like agenda item 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we just do them. They're done.
Because it takes approximately 1 to 2 weeks minimum of staff time to develop each of the RFPs.
How many hours?
1 to 2 weeks on the general write-up, and then we start the circulation process.
For one of these RFPs?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, again, limited time, limited resources.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
Just trying to figure out the status. I appreciate it.
Well, just let you know that the arborist actually was available in May, and I wanted to put him in there, but it was held up because of IRS issues, and so we could have had him then, but here we are.
Right. Yeah.
You have to decide how you're going to do it. If you're going to try to do it with limited term hires, county defined employees, you have to have these positions that match current descriptions, if you're going to try to do it somewhat quickly. Otherwise, you go through that process, which is develop the position, develop the description, bring it to board, go
So
out, process a
I'd
hire.
like to also add that, during the recovery process, you'll notice that environmental health had teams of people helping them. They had teams, and through Cal Recycle, and they had lots of contractors, and Public Works had one person.
Why is
So-
that? Is it different, is it because of the type of industry?
No, it's not. It was the program. The Cal Recycle program, which is a program that had been previously established for state-declared disasters, specifically fires, state had made the determination that when you have burdened structures, that's the first thing you have to take care of and get rid of. It's a public health hazard. So Office of Emergency Services, California Office of Emergency Services, have predefined teams with experience that arrived here when the fire was still burning. Because I remember being in the initial meetings with Cal Recycle and Mr. Boser.
Kind of a priority.
It was a
program
huge priority. And so what they do is they
Yes.
arrive and they've got a management team in place who has done this before. They have 2 or 3 contractors that they've worked with, and they say, you are one because you have the time, the staff availability. And they're able to put that in place and move. But I don't know if you ever went into any of the D-Rocks, the one that they temporarily established in Angels and the one that came here in San Andreas, but you saw that they were staffed 40, 50
So
people.
there's just nothing like that for Public Works?
Not for these types of projects. These types of recovery programs, they're assumed by both state and federal government that existing staff can handle, or we are flexible enough and have enough available resources that we can develop the proposals that meet federal, state, and local purchasing guidelines.
I think he's just being nice, actually. They didn't want to give him the staff and so he didn't get it. He could have built the staff for it, could have got the reimbursement, and they didn't do that. So that's the way it is.
Who's they? Cal OES?
Well, no, actually, Jeff was asking for help, but he didn't ask the right way. He didn't know how to ask. Didn't ask the right way, so he didn't get the help. And so, if you don't ask the right way, it's like you said earlier, it's kind of like a different language, and didn't ask the right way, and he wasn't able to get it.
So
It's like-
asking Cal OES or FEMA or both?
Whomever, yeah, wherever the program should come from. I mean, we could get. Don't you remember when OES came in? What can we do for you? And then you just ask the right questions, they will help you. If you don't know how to ask the right questions, then they're not going to.
And plus, the Cal Recycle program, I mean, that's been developed over the years.
Cal Recycle is already in place.
Yeah, to get to this point where they're like, oh yeah, we know how to do this, let's go do it. Whereas I doesn't seem like there's anything in place to help.
So like through
No, but every
CSAPs
one of our departments should have, in my opinion, had built a group of folks to handle the Butte fire, and so that they can operate their own department separately. And Jason's department is actually, I think, is the only one that did. So.
And so, getting back to the very, unless you're right now.
Yeah, I'm going to have questions, but go ahead.
So on this division kind of reshuffle or format here, the disaster recovery response division, do you envision this thing happening continuously? Or is it like in the case of a disaster, then this is the program we set up, and it looks like this, and it needs this level of staffing, and the staffing comes from X, Y, or Z? Is that kind of what you're saying, or is this a permanent?
That'll be for the next 8 years, actually.
It's, Supervisor Wright, the only way I can answer it is that we've talked a lot today about emergency response. And we've talked a lot about, actually, We've talked about a Office of Emergency Services and responding to a disaster, be it a fire where you're doing suppression, and then as soon as the fire is out, then you begin recovering from your suppression activities to repair the damage, and moving along. And that program for fires is predefined, pre-set up. There are people that are trained and they are mobilized as soon as the fire reaches a certain size and a lack of containment. So that BARC crew, the ones that prepared the 150-page report on the damage to the structures and the structures that were still to be hit, and where our highest intensity burns were and where our most likely erosion problems were going to be, they were out here within 3 or 4 days, and they were starting their work immediately. So they were funded, they were trained, they had the tools and equipment, and they were ready to go. You cannot separate, in my mind, recovery from a disaster from response to a disaster. And so you don't necessarily have to have a program the size of that. The size of the program is completely dependent upon the damage and the funding to recover from the damage. But when we show you that in this county, for every $300,000 you're going to spend, you're going to need at least one staff person babysitting that per year. That's not a bad rule of thumb. So in my former life as a consultant, running a single project that had a construction value of $35 million, that wasn't too bad. I could manage that with a staff of 4. But once I started getting above $75 million, that was more than one manager can handle. So I think to answer your question is that you cannot segregate recovery from an emergency response network. And whether you have people in place, you need to have people that are familiar with how to do the work and have the tools to be able to do the work, and then the flexibility to build your structure the way an incident command structure is built. And the Sheriff's Office talked about it today again and again. These are time-sensitive recoveries. And we don't have time to learn on the job. We don't have time to staff up to do the job if we don't have processes in place. I mean, Supervisor Edson, wanted to hire a forester to manage burn tree removal and then jump into hazard tree removal, tree mortality issues. We have no position at the county that has that description. We can't hire it. Why not? Why isn't there emergency positions for response and recovery built into our system so that we're not taking...
Actually, I wanted to hire him as a contractor, and I was stopped from doing that too, so then we're stuck where we are.
We are where we are. It's not good. But again, I assure this board, those of you that are leaving, it's been great for me. I've felt tremendous support from you all throughout. I'm still in a state of shock because I felt like we were actually gaining some traction, but I will continue on. I never thought I would outlast you, and I will continue to work with the new board.
Well, I hope you always planned on outlasting me.
Yeah, that's only like a month and 2 weeks.
Any other questions?
Well, just let you know, I'm really not going to go anywhere.
Oh, I know. You need a job? So if there were any recommendations, if this board, knowing what this board knows, the benefit of the wisdom of your tenure, has any suggestions, I would gladly hear them. If not, we can continue on. Take public comment or do whatever.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Provost.
All right, Chair Edson has to step away for a few minutes. When's your arrival back to the closed session, do you think?
10 minutes.
Okay. So I think that is, now we're going to move to public comment, if there's any public comment.
Okay, so this morning we talked about one of the issues with this fire and the response of this where fire was.
Do we want to just make you staff comments so then
Sure.
you can talk longer.
Sure. Was a failure to communicate, okay? This is a perfect example of failure to communicate. The fact that Mr. Kravitz had a conversation with Cal OES to discuss the 6 1/4 that we were told was not going to be on the county's coffers, but he has had a conversation with Cal OES that it is. That conversation never happened with me. It never happened with the CAO. I'm unaware if it happened with anyone else in the administrative office. That is a fundamental problem, is this lack of communication and this lack of understanding about response, recovery, OES, and financial budgetary decisions, because they really do go hand in hand. So I'm a little frustrated that that conversation didn't happen. I'd be curious who you had the conversation with Cal OES, because I have communications directly from Cal OES that I shared with the Board of Supervisors stating that we don't have to pay that match. So if that has changed, that's,
A huge deal.
Yeah,
I'm going to have a major
yeah.
problem with that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, yeah, how does the authority work there if one hand of Cal OS is saying we need to pay the money, the other is saying we don't?
Right.
I mean, how do we get to the one that says we don't?
Right, and so I would say as soon as that conversation started happening, that would have been a good segue into, hold on, let me go get the auditor controller or the CAO to jump on this phone call or get in this meeting, because
I think they were meeting in Sacramento.
this has a huge impact on the county. As far as matches go, everything that has to go with Butte Fire, we have always presented to the Board of Supervisors that Butte Fire matches under the Public Assistance Program would be borne by the general fund. We would have to find the money to do that, because if that is the priority of the Board of Supervisors, then we have to meet that funding requirement. That's always been the discussion. That was the discussion that we had with Mr. Kravitz in his budgetary meetings. That's been the discussion that we've had with the board. When I found out that we were not going to have to pay the 6 1/4, that brought our $1.4 million match, because if you recall early on in the emergency, we were talking about $1.4 to $1.7 million of match. That's why Mr. Moss and I went to Sacramento. That's why we were asking for legislative assistance in deferring that match some way, getting some assistance with that. When we found out we weren't going to have to pay that 6 1/4 on some of the projects, that was a huge relief for us. We got it in writing that we don't have to do that, so I am a little perturbed that I'm finding this out right now in a public meeting, as opposed to having this discussion where we could find out the real facts of this. In addition, as far as why Mr. Kravitz didn't get staff, he did ask for staff early on. I want to say it was in the latter part of September, early part of October. We were all kind of struggling with understanding, who's going to pay for this? What's the match going to be? Is this going to be a contractor? Is it going to be a permanent employee? What are we looking at? What are we talking about? And he couldn't really explain to me. He couldn't explain to the CAO. He couldn't explain to the HR director exactly what it was that he needed, and I don't think he really knew what he needed. So we did try to work with him to try to get to the crux of the issues with regards to what is standing in your way, what can we do to assist you. When I realized, when we kind of worked all of that out, we said absolutely, hire a program manager, hire project managers. We made sure that HR got the green light, go ahead, start running recruitments. They did run an ad for multiple positions, and those applications came in, and he chose not to fill one of the positions, and he chose to hire one of them. So out of the two that he ran, he ended up hiring one extra hire. That extra hire to date, we've paid over 1,500 hours. Okay. In addition, I specifically told Mr. Kravitz, as well as multiple other departments, and Cal OES and FEMA also stressed this, don't dump this on your staff. Hire contractors. It's much cleaner. We don't have to deal with this timekeeping stuff. We don't have to deal with they spent 4 hours on this and 4 hours on that. Just make it clean. Hire contractors. In addition, contractors, you can, with the scope of work, make sure that you're finding contractors that understand this, that understand how they respond to an emergency, how they take those resources that they have to build us through this recovery. That's the importance of a contractor, because that expertise is not here, and it's not always going to be here. But we can find contractors that are. And that's always been understood, that we could hire contractors. So I think that it's been a little frustrating for me. I know it's been frustrating with Cal OES and with FEMA, why we haven't and why we're still having these discussions. I think that there are limitations on how much we can pay for overhead, and I don't think it's in the best interest of this recovery to stack administration. We need to get people to actually be doing the work. And the work should not be, I don't believe, should be employees, either on an extra hire basis or on a permanent basis. It should be contractors, because it makes it clean and makes them specific to those respective projects. We definitely have to have oversight. And I think that, between my office administration and whatever department is involved in these recovery pieces, we can work with them. If we do need to backfill some, staff or hire some limited term positions or whatever, let's have that discussion. But those discussions aren't happening. Instead, this is getting put together and then it's coming to the board of supervisors, and then we're hearing all of these things that we're not entirely sure what the end result is going to be. And I'm not entirely sure how we're going to fund this, because I do know that there are limitations on indirect costs. Okay, so we can't, in terms of administration, we can't even charge all of this administration to a project. So this is way outside the scope of what is allowable within the grants that we're looking at. I think that, the same issues that Mr. Kravitz brought up in terms of staffing and being pulled in multiple directions can be said in every single department that had to deal with this fire. It could be said in Health and Human Services. It could be said in Animal Services. It could be said in Environmental Health. But what they did is they made this recovery, or they made that response, a priority. And it did mean that they had to forego other public services. They did. They absolutely did. Every department did that. Those are choices that each department has to make. With regards to funding, Mr. Kravitz said that he had put it in his budget and he was asked to take it out. I was at, maybe he had other budget meetings that I wasn't at. That didn't happen. We specifically said you need to discuss what the dollars are that we're talking about, and we need to include that information in a discussion with the board. The board needs to understand and make a decision. Do you want to fix the roads in both the FHW, the federal aid roads, and the non-federal aid roads? This is what the match is. Do you want to do all of it? Do you want to just do these? Do you want to do that? Give the board some options so that they can make a decision with regards to whether they want to pay the match, the whole match, a portion of the match. Give me a list of what's the worst, the worst burnt roads, whatever you needed in order to maybe make some priority decisions. And that never happened. It never came back forward. So we did have these discussions. When I realized Public Works was struggling in terms of moving forward, I specifically had frustrations with Cal OES because I felt like it was unfair that Environmental Health had a Cal OES person that would go weekly and meet with them and make sure, are you on this page? Are you on that page? What else do you have? How's the DROC going? How's this going? How's the coordination of this effort going? What's the progress? And I didn't feel like Public Works or Health and Human Services had that same luxury. And so with the fact that we had so many burned trees, and that was really a set in terms of scope, right? We had the hazard, the ash removal project, which was enormous. Trees are right behind it. And I felt like that really needed to be a priority, and we needed to do what we could in order to give Public Works whatever help we needed to. I made a phone call to Cal OES. I specifically talked to as high up as I could possibly go, and they did agree to give us some assistance. But Mr. Kravitz had to reach out to Cal OES and ask for it. He had to state what the assistance was that he needed. Cal OES can't come in and do the work for us, but they can offer us assistance by way of, whether it's best practice or contract templates or other agencies that have maybe gone through this to give us, just fill in the blanks for us on various items. And that didn't happen. So I can bring the horse to the water, but I can't make him drink. And that's exactly what happened in this circumstance. So I feel like we did everything that we possibly could in order to coordinate and strategize and push this forward and give Public Works everything that we possibly could give them. And it wasn't taken. So, I really have concerns with this model. I felt like we had our own issues with the structure that we had during the Butte fire. Breaking it up further really concerns me because I think we even more so have a loss of control, an absolute setup for failure in terms of communication, and I don't agree with this at all.
Okay, well, thank you. Public comment? Al?
Well, big thank you for the work's been done here. I'm just amazed at how complex this is. And even more than being amazed, I'm so thankful that we got a good CAO. And I think we're going to have to put him to work. I think the taxpayers would want to have clarity and protect the taxpayers. And so what needs to be identified is what funds are available. And I think the CAO, working with Rebecca, can probably come to the answer of that. The next thing we need to know is what needs to be done and what will the cost be. This involves funds coming in from other entities. It makes it more complicated. And so the funds available from the county or from the taxpayer would probably relate to the matching funds rather than the whole cost of whatever project there is. So we need to identify the work and its cost. We need to identify our funds that we have available from the county and then put together a plan. And it's awful hard for the board to do this and or even to do it at a board meeting. And so you have to rely on the talent that you have. And that falls to our CAO. He's going to need to, just the OES has done recovery and firework right now, and yet there's been no feedback on that with our plans under discussion now. And so that needs to be done. There was some attempt to do it, but apparently through communication problem, it was not successful. So once we get a clear picture, then we'll get recommendations from our county administrative officer, and then you'll be able to work on his recommendations after he's gathered all this information. And this is really, we're talking to the new board now. They're going to have to get into this to solve. Well, you're the new board, so it's up to you as to how you want to go. Now,
30 seconds.
one of the things that the new board may discuss would be maybe a slight reorientation of how county government is structured. You have one way is a line organization, a chain of command. This is where your department heads report to the CAO. They don't report to the board. The board doesn't make decisions on hiring and firing them. It goes right, you have authority in place.
The executive officer.
Yeah, and so you have five people making the decision of hiring and firing only one person, and that's your CAO. And the rest of it's his responsibility. Now that makes it clean, even though it makes it harder work. I don't even know if it makes it harder work or not, but it makes it really clean, and then we can get direction and go forward.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you.
I would just like to comment on that real quick, and that is, I would like to assure you, Al, and others, that indeed the administrative office has been working very closely with all the departments, including especially the auditor controller, because of these disasters. So just if you ever wish to discuss that in further detail, I'm available. Thank you.
More public comment?
Is it public or staff?
Are you staff or public?
I'm a 3-minute person, I think.
Okay.
Mike Miller, Arnold, California. I had just a few comments. I worked here during the Butte fire when we were hearing the word HMGP and FMAG repeatedly, and that was an application process Calaveras Amador put together and submitted through the Public Works Department. It got waylaid and it was taken to you as a board, I believe in late December or early January, when the CAO's office picked it up. Since that time, no projects have been submitted for either of those grants, and there was a telephone conversation October 5th with Cal OES about if we didn't get going, we were going to lose it. So the issue is you have to put attention to something and keep your attention on it. I'm going to jump around because I have different things here. We deobligated bridges when I was here last time as your Public Works Director because we couldn't do them and we couldn't afford them. I've been coming here for 10 years, 3 times as your Public Works Director. This is the first year I've heard that a bridge is going to be built, and it's being built because we have to pay the money back. For me, it's hard to look at this department and say anything other than this. It's understaffed. Most of the cuts have come to field positions. You can't find extra hire snowplow drivers. The department needs a complete review. Absolute complete review. I was in an agency, 2 cities and a special district that built an 18-mile pipeline. I went to a meeting once a week for 2.5 years with a design build team. We solicited for a design build team. They did everything. After our elected officials approved the projects in all 3 agencies, my requirement and my responsibility was once a week, half a day, report back to my board or my council on exactly what we were doing. That pipeline was built, completed, and put into operation in 2 years without me doing anything more than weekly meetings, and it was a successful project. So there's other ways of doing things you can't do or you don't have the staff to do. That's just my thoughts.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, bring it back to the board. You guys have anything else you want to say?
No.
I do. I think it's time we realize to quit pointing fingers and get this damn job done. We've been spending a lot of time saying, you did this, you did this. That's not helping us, folks. We need to get back together and go the same direction together. Because right now it's not working. I'll reserve any more comments when the board sits in January.
Okay. That's it for our agenda items here. We're going to go back into closed session. I don't even get to hit this, but okay.